this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. Delighted to have back with us Justin Wolfers, who is a professor of economics at the University of Michigan. Welcome, Justin.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Jen.
We have a tariff war, but I kind of feel like we're shooting blind or shooting with a gun and we don't quite know what the bullets are. What are these tariff letters that Trump has been sending out?
Well, actually, let's go back a step because I like the fact that you want to focus on what are we doing and why are we doing it, because that is the original sin here. The original sin is the president likes tariffs, but he's not really sure why. You know, it's a little bit, I understand. I really like Bob Dylan music, and I'm not really sure why. Because, you know, if you think about it, he doesn't have a great voice. I do think his lyrics are really something. He's a pretty good musician. But, you know, once you understand why you're doing something, it gives structure on what you do. So why do we have tariffs? This is just a partial list for you, Jen. I'm trying to think through everything we've been told about why we should have tariffs. So the first tariffs, when he came to power this time, were to keep fentanyl out of the US. So he put tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Now, the odd thing is, if you want to keep fentanyl out of the US, why would you put a tariff on Canada, where almost no fentanyl comes from? Then it was that we were going to prevent illegal immigration from Canada and Mexico. Now, by the way, most illegal immigration is people who fly in a plane, they land, and then they just decide not to leave.
Okay.
The next plan was that we were going to reindustrialize. We were going to save American manufacturing by having tariffs. And if that's the case, why would we put tariffs on things that are not manufactured? Why would we put tariffs on inputs to manufacturing, on steel and copper and aluminium, which are all things that American manufacturers use their wizardry to transform into something even more beautiful. So we've added to the costs facing American manufacturers in a way that their competitors don't. Then we were told we'd get tariff revenue to offset the income tax cuts. And in fact, at some point, Trump told us that he could eliminate the income tax. Now, we have the tariffs, we still have the income taxes, I'm afraid. To the extent that there is any offset, it's to pay some of the massive deficit that arose because he's cut taxes on the rich. So what tariffs do, tariffs like a sales tax, so they rise roughly in proportion to how much you spend. Low-income people spend a larger share of their income than do high-income people. So in fact, they're sort of like an income tax, but where you have higher tax rates on low-income people and lower tax rates on high-income people. So if this were a tariff or income tax swap, it turns out that somehow along the way he's managed to take from the poor and give to the rich. And if I remember the story of Robin Hood at all, well, I think we try and do the opposite.
Yes, yes.
Then he said, then came Liberation Day. And the Liberation Day tariffs were set proportional to each country's bilateral trade deficit. First problem with that, of course, is that any economist will tell you that your one country specific, which is a bilateral trade deficit, is utterly irrelevant. Second problem is, why did we look at the bilateral trade deficit in goods rather than goods and services? And the third that affects a country, particularly my own, Australia, America, we buy more from America than America buys from us. Yet still America put a 10% trade tariff on us. And the even funnier thing is the rationale was that these were reciprocal tariffs. They were reciprocal for trade barriers that other countries put up. Australia has a free trade agreement with the US. We have no trade barriers. So we also have, by the way, you know, he imposed tariffs on Korea and many other countries with whom we have actually free trade agreements. So when Liberation Day blew up, Trump stood up 7 days later and he said, no, I didn't actually ever want tariffs. What I wanted was leverage for deals. And so that's when we're going to get 90 deals in 90 days. One side note, by the way, you have leverage against other countries, whether or not you actually impose those taxes on Americans in the interim. So we didn't need them, but nonetheless, he said 90 deals in 90 days. 90 days just ran out and we have two frameworks. So of the 192 countries in the world, we immediately declared we were never going to talk to 102 of them again. We were going to do deals with a further 90. We ended up only talking with 88 of them. The two deals that we have, one is with Britain, which is a tiny side deal that really didn't require any presidential or even major fanfare. And the other is with Vietnam, but they're still yet to release the text of it. And when you don't release the text of a deal, I kind of start to think either it's not a deal or you're not very proud of it. Anyway, so now we're at 90 days. 90 days has happened. But along the way, Trump got worried the US dollar would no longer be the reserve currency. So he threatened tariffs on any countries that would use a currency other than the US dollar, despite the fact every country has its own currency. Then he got mad because he discovered that Canada has a digital services tax that has had, in fact, since 2024. So he called the Canadians and said, I'm going to stop talking to you unless you get rid of your digital services tax. If you don't get rid of that, then otherwise we won't be able to make a trade deal with you. So in fact, the Canadians got rid of their digital services tax. So this is a whole new rationale. Now American trade policy is going to be used to engineer Canadian tax policy. Fair enough. And so he said we'd go back to the bargaining table with the Canadians. And the problem with that is 3 weeks later, he then told the Canadians that their new tariff was 35% and all conversations are over. So then he turned up at NATO and said, I'm very upset at the Spaniards. The Spaniards are not spending enough on defense. So now American tariff policy is all about Spanish defense policy. And he threatened that he was going to impose tariffs on Spain, which is a very interesting thing to do because Spain is part of the European Union and it's literally impossible to put a tariff on Spain and not the rest of the European Union. Then he bombed Iran, fair enough, good foreign policy reasons for that. But he got really mad because the so-called BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, were not very supportive. And so he's threatened an extra 10% tariff on anyone who was mean to him about his plans to bomb Iran. So now, I guess now American tariff policy has moved on to American foreign policy. And then most recently, we've just imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil. This, of course, is the centerpiece of any America First policy, which is we are going to tax Americans who buy goods from Brazil in order to prevent the Brazilians allowing their criminal justice system to put an insurrectionist in prison. The idea that you and I should be paying more for our coffee that comes predominantly from Brazil because we want to keep Bolsonaro out of prison because we don't like it when people try to overthrow their government and get stopped, really does beg a belief. Jen, that was a long list. Let me tell you why I told it to you. Any one of those rationales leads to different forms of tariffs. If you care about national defense, oh, I forgot national defense. I'm sorry. National defense was another thing that we were going to do with American tariff policy, that this is all about defending the United States. Of course, if that's the case, why do we have a tariff on horse saddles? Unless we're going to war on horses, and I don't recommend we do that. The Canadians have Mounties. They're going to kill us. Why would you have tariffs on that? If what you want to do is industrialize or bring stuff back to the United States, why do we have a tariff on bananas that we can never possibly grow here? And so the point is the objective determines the policy. But the objective keeps changing and the policy is incoherent. And so what we have, and I'm willing to say, this hurts me as an economist, it hurts my feelings to say, if you as a member of the audience right now who's listening to this and you think, you know what, I don't think tariffs are such a bad idea, I'm going to say, fair enough. Now that hurts my feelings to say that. I'm going to meet you where you are. I may even let you win that argument. And then I'm going to say, okay, even if you think tariffs are a good idea, are incompetent, incoherent tariffs a good idea? And this is where I want to get to the theory of the case. If anything good is ever going to happen from tariffs, and I think the bad outweighs the good, but were anything good, it would be that American companies realize that with tariffs, they can produce more here, right? But they would only build a factory here if they expect the tariffs to be around after the factory was built. It takes a couple of years to build a factory. Every past American leader who has engaged in trade deals, a real trade deal goes through Congress. The reason it goes through Congress is once you get it through Congress, it's hard to undo. And once it's hard to undo, it's like a marriage vow. Once something's hard to undo, you can rely on it and you can make investments around it. Now, the thing is, these are all executive orders. Trump hasn't bothered with Congress. If it's a Democratic president next, almost certainly the first thing he or she will do is cross them out and get rid of them. Of course, Trump may do that by next Wednesday, who the heck knows. But none of these are built to be enduring. And because they're not enduring, we get none of the upside. But we're actually paying the tariffs, which means we get all of the downside.
So a few questions about all of this. Yeah, that's quite all right. I think you've covered the waterfront. does Trump want tariffs to remain because he wanted the revenue so we could get rid of the income tax? Or does he want the tariffs to go away, which is why he instituted these as, quote, leverage? Which is it? Or is it both? Or is it neither?
Um, it's clear that I think it was clear leading up to Liberation Day that the president wanted tariffs. He was trying to spend the revenue. He was talking about tariffs. He spent his life talking about tariffs.
Yes.
And it really took markets to crater, the world to see how incoherent the tariffs were. In some sense, we were lucky that these were incoherent tariffs because it meant no one could defend them. So everyone calls the White House and says, you've got to stop this madness. And so he walked it back. So the 90 deals in 90 days came on April 9. And April 9 was when he basically called off or issued the 90-day pause on the tariffs. That was clearly a face-saving back down. So I think the original deal never was to get, the original idea never was to get deals. Given that, it's probably not very surprising that they didn't strike many deals. Now, there's a whole different set of questions. Why was this an absurd idea to start with? But the reason your question is so important, Jen, is when Liberation Day happened, markets tanked. And when markets tanked, Trump chickened out.
Yes.
Led to this new word, taco. Trump always chickens out. The problem is taco is the wrong word. Trump chickens out when interests he values stand to lose a lot, which is to say, when financial markets respond.
Yes.
What's happened this time is, let me go back one step. I just want to apologize to everyone here. You don't want to be hearing about tariffs right now. You're bored of tariffs. You're bored of hearing from me. You're bored of hearing about Trump. You're bored of all of this. I'm not the one who chose summer reruns here. He is. I wish we could move the conversation on. You might be feeling right now, didn't we have this exact same conversation 90 days ago? And from memory, Jen, you and I did. And what happened was the 90 days ran out. They didn't get any deals. And what he's done with the tariff letters, right? So he said no deal. So he redefined the word deal to letter. I'm going to send you a letter. So far, those letters roughly suggest he's going back to Liberation Day. Now, I say roughly because what he did was, depending on who you are, you got your old your old number, which to be clear was incoherent. And he added a couple of percentage points or subtracted a couple to make it look like he'd done some homework over the ensuing 90 days. And then took a couple of gratuitous pot shots, Brazil, Canada, and the EU, where he's just gotten extremely punitive in the last couple of days for reasons probably that I hope he's talking to his therapist about. So then here we are. So if it feels like there's a lot going on, it's hard to keep track of the news. Let me shorten the whole thing up for you. We had Liberation Day, didn't poll well, so pressed pause. 90 days later, we're seeing the summer rerun. And if everything feels the same, it's because it is.
What's interesting, among other things, about these letters, which are so incoherent as to make Trump's speeches seem eloquent, is the countries and the numbers he sent them to. Some of them don't make sense at all. We don't even recognize Miramar, for example. He sent a letter to Miramar. What is next? A letter to Genovia or some other made-up country? I mean, it seems like he, first of all, got the idea, well, I don't have deals, but I'll send letters. And then he got into this argument with the press. Well, the letter is the deal. Well, in that case, I'm going to send a letter to Trump asking for $1 million, and I have $1 million. We have a deal. So there's so much language confusion and so much plain confusion. Have the markets stopped reacting because they're numb? At this point, they don't know whatever's going to change. It's not worth selling, buying, whatever. And they've kind of lost the thread here.
I don't think so. There's so many billions of dollars being bet in financial markets. There are some guys in some sharp suits who are very smart, who have lots of MBAs working for them, who are keeping track of this. And I'm sorry, I got started on this and then got distracted. So what happened was he backed down the first time. That led to this taco, Trump always chickens out. When you talk to people on Wall Street, why haven't markets responded? We're seeing the rerun of something that caused markets to tank. Why aren't markets tanking again? It's because they believe Trump always chickens out. And so that's why your question a moment ago was so important, which is if this is just another desperate attempt to threaten tariffs but not actually impose them, then there's no reason for markets to respond, because as soon as he says it, they'll go away in a couple of weeks. No harm, no foul. Trump always chickens out is the expression. Now, the problem with that is you need a lot of data to know whether someone does something always or just frequently. And we haven't had enough trade wars to be confident about that. So I'd say put a bit of weight on frequently. Then I'd look across his history. I don't like doing Trumpology, but the truth is this is a man who seems to genuinely and profoundly believe that bilateral trade deficits are a problem. So that would lead you not to chicken out. And then the third thing is you look across policy domains. And what he's doing in some of those domains, and the example I'll give you most clearly would be immigration, is unimaginable a decade ago. And they show, if not great foresight, certainly great courage of his convictions. This is not a courage I admired, but it is courage. He is doing something extraordinarily unexpected and outside the norms of what we thought was okay. If he does that in some domains, who's to say he wouldn't do that in the tariff domain? So I think the financial markets have misread this. I think, or I should say fear, there is a very, very substantial chance he sticks with these tariffs. And if that's the case, we're all going to wake up again, and you'll probably call me in a month's time and you'll call and say, Justin, could you come on the show to explain to my audience why we're all talking about recessions?
Yes.
And I'll be delighted to take your call, Jen. And the first answer will be, go back and look at our conversation from mid-July when I told you that this is going to happen. I want to be clear. I'm not saying a recession is going to happen. I'm saying recession fears are almost certainly going to rise pretty dramatically. If I'm right that he sticks with these. So the other thing is we have this feedback loop, which is the president does something, and if markets react, he undoes it. Now, if markets understand he's going to undo it, then markets won't react. And if markets don't react, he won't undo it.
He keeps going. Yes.
And so the mechanism breaks. There's a reason we don't listen to the market as our primary governance mechanism. It's because these loops get circular and problematic. And I think the problem right now is the markets aren't reacting. So therefore the president feels that they're approving of what he's doing, when in reality, they just don't believe he'll do what he's doing.
Well, that's a dreary topic. Before our time is up, I want to switch to another dreary topic, and that is his dragnet on immigration.
Mm-hmm.
Again, he was going to round up everyone. Then he heard from the farm community, the hospitality community, probably the people who run his own hotels and golf courses. No, we're going to lay off those people because, gosh, we won't have workers, we won't get the food, we won't get houses built. Then we heard, no, they're going back on again. Where do you think this is headed? And why are big business not, shall we say, more engaged in opposing this draconian policy, given the fact it's their workers, it's their consumers, it's their businesses that will go to hell in a handbasket if he really does start deporting 1 million people a year or whatever nonsense he has in mind?
Let me take a moment to pause on the economics, because this is a very human issue.
Yes.
I'm an immigrant. I know what it's like to build your life over here. I know what it's, I now have a passport, an American passport, but I didn't. I had a green card. There was an implicit promise that if I came over here and did the right thing and followed the rules, that there was a pathway, that I would have to work hard at school, get a good job, contribute. And I'm glad that I'm through the other side and I have a passport and I don't have to take my kids back to a country they didn't grow up in. And so before we get caught on any of the rest of the economics, I want to just emphasize how much more important
Yes.
that human aspect is. These are people. These are their lives. For many, this is their home and their home country. When they watch the Olympics, they cheer for the United States. So that's the first thing. Okay. Let me go back and put the economist hat on. Why isn't big business loud here? So I want to give a direct answer and an indirect one. So the direct one is, this president has shown himself to do favors to businesses who stay in his good graces and to punish those who don't. This started all the way back when he tried to change the postage rates that Amazon would have to pay because he was upset that Jeff Bezos owned the Washington Post that was not praising him daily. But the thing you'll notice, and this, it comes back to the tariff conversation, tariffs, you can turn them on and off for different groups very easily. One of the first things he did actually when we started the tariff war with Canada and Mexico was he turned off the tariffs for the big three automakers. So they were able to call and say, hey, we need this. That was an incredibly clear signal to everyone else. If you play nice with this White House, we'll play nice with you. So now all of a sudden, if you're the CEO of any corporation, do you want to be heard by the president criticizing his approach? And I think the answer is very, very clearly no. Let me just quick detour. Why is this so bad? This is sometimes what we call crony capitalism. Why is it so bad? And this is where I want to give, I want to draw a distinction. Think about the genius of Steve Jobs, who used to run Apple. Steve Jobs was relentlessly focused on making the greatest phone ever made. He was focused on technology and user experience and great supply chains and just a brilliant designer and a brilliant businessman. Now think about Tim Cook, his successor. What's Tim Cook's most important job right now?
Keeping Trump happy.
Yeah, quite literally.
Yeah.
Where should I build my next factory? Could I build it in India instead of China, given what's going on with China? Oh, do I have to fly to the White House? Should I pretend that we're going to screw in tiny screws? There's tax issues here. There's intellectual property issues. There's so many issues. Tim Cook's most important job is being seen at Mar-a-Lago. What that means is that we lack the visionary brilliance of Steve Jobs right now. Not because Jobs is dead, but because the president has asked the man who took Jobs' job to focus on something else. So that was the sidebar of why is this such an unhelpful form of capitalism? So why is big business not complaining about the hit to immigration? Because they're scared. Now let me come back and I want to, if I may, a couple of minutes on the economics of immigration. This comes back to starting with understanding that immigrants are people. An immigrant is a person the same way my daughter is a person. Now, no one thinks my daughter is a threat to the American economy. Why is that? My daughter is an American citizen. Young Matilda will grow up and she will be both on the supply side of the economy. She'll have a job, she'll be productive, and she'll be on the demand side. She'll be buying stuff. So she made both the supply side and the demand side bigger by one person. So more or less, she cancels out. This is why you can have some countries that have a lot of people and are very successful, and other countries have not many people and they're very successful. It's because the number of people, because each of those people matter on both sides, right? Now, why do I tell you this? So first of all, this says, anytime you're worried about immigration, make sure you're thinking about the immigrant as both part of demand and part of supply. They're as much of a person as my daughter Matilda is. So the moral way of saying this is, if you don't object to my daughter Matilda, why do you object to the immigrant in her class called Jose? The economic version of this is just to say, just as Matilda is part of demand and part of supply, and therefore she's neither taking jobs nor creating them, she's doing both, but she's doing them in exactly equal measure. So she's creating one job and participating in one job. So is Jose, right? Now, once you realize an immigrant is both part of demand, part of supply, let's think about big business. They benefit from both sides, right? Because they sell to Matilda and Jose, and they employ Matilda and Jose.
Yes.
The only thing that's different between big countries and small countries is how big the biggest of businesses are, right? American big business is much larger than Australian big business. So these guys should be wildly pro-immigration.
Yes.
whether it's because they're employers or sellers. There might be other groups who should be less so, right? So if Jose is more likely to work in a particular industry, let's say construction, and you're a construction worker, Jose is a threat to you. But if you're a home buyer, Jose is the opposite. So I'm not saying it's always zero sum. There are some differences. Roughly speaking, overall, Jose is no more of a threat than Matilda. Matilda wants to work in social work. So if you plan to work in social work, she may take your job. So there's always winners and losers. But overall, both Matilda and Jose both produce a bit and consume a bit. And you should be threatened by neither of them.
Well, I think we know that there is something other than economics that is driving this policy, is something ugly and dark, and a great deal of the reason why Donald Trump was elected. But we will save that for another day. Thank you, as always, for trying to explain the inexplicable, try to make rational the irrational, but leave us all a little bit better prepared to figure out what's coming down the pike next. So thanks so much. We'll look forward to having you back soon.
Great pleasure, Jen. Thanks.